Right now, the United States government owes more than $34 trillion. That number is so large it's almost impossible to imagine. But here's the unsettling part. The debt is still growing. Every hour, every minute, every second. Most Americans rarely think about it. The economy keeps running. The lights stay on. Life feels normal. But behind the scenes, economists are asking a serious question. What happens if the world's largest economy keeps borrowing forever? And the answer might be closer than anyone expects. To understand this story, we need to step back for a moment. Governments borrow money all the time. It's not unusual. In fact, debt helps build highways, fund wars, and stimulate economic growth. The United States began borrowing heavily during major moments in history, like World War II, financial crises, and recessions. Each time the country eventually stabilized its debt. But today, something about the current situation is different. For decades, America's debt increased gradually, but in the last 20 years, it accelerated dramatically. Wars, tax cuts, stimulus packages, and economic crises all added trillions. Then came the pandemic, when the government spent massive amounts to stabilize the economy. The result? A national debt growing faster than almost any point in modern history. And the real question is no longer how big the debt is, but who is actually paying for it. Here's how it works. When the US government needs money, it sells something called Treasury bonds. Investors buy these bonds, essentially lending money to the government. In return, the government promises to pay the money back, with interest. For decades, these bonds were considered one of the safest investments in the world. Countries, banks, and investors all wanted them. But something surprising is starting to happen. The cost of servicing America's debt, the interest payments alone, is now exploding. In fact, the United States is beginning to spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year just to pay interest on what it already owes. Not new programs, not interest, just interest. And as interest rates rise, the situation becomes even more complicated. Because when rates increase, the government must pay more to borrow new money. That means each year the debt becomes more expensive to maintain. Economists sometimes compare this to a credit card balance, where the interest starts growing faster than the payments. But here's where the stakes rise. The US government isn't just borrowing for emergencies anymore. It's borrowing simply to keep the system running. Each year, Washington spends more money than it collects in taxes. That difference is called the deficit. And when deficits continue year after year, the national debt keeps expanding. And yet, despite all this, the US economy hasn't collapsed. In fact, investors around the world still buy American debt. Why? Because the United States controls the world's dominant reserve currency, the dollar. That global trust gives the country enormous financial power. But some economists are beginning to warn about a potential tipping point. What happens if investors start questioning America's ability to manage its debt? If confidence drops, borrowing costs could rise even faster. And that could trigger a financial shock few people are prepared for. To be clear, the United States isn't bankrupt. Not even close. It still has one of the strongest economies on Earth. But the long-term trend is what concerns experts. Debt growing faster than economic output can eventually create pressure on the entire financial system. And here's an important detail many people overlook. A large portion of the US debt is actually owned by Americans themselves, through pension funds, retirement accounts, and financial institutions, which means the system is deeply interconnected. But there's another piece of the puzzle. Foreign countries also hold massive amounts of US debt. Nations like Japan and China have historically been among the largest holders of US Treasury bonds. And this is where geopolitics enters the story. Because if global relationships shift, those countries could reduce their purchases of US debt. That wouldn't cause an instant crisis, but over time it could make borrowing more expensive. Now add another factor, aging demographics. As the population grows older, programs like Social Security and Medicare become more expensive. That means government spending could continue rising in the future. This creates a complicated balancing act. Raise taxes too quickly, and economic growth could slow. Cut spending too aggressively, and vital programs may suffer. Finding the right balance has become one of the biggest political challenges in Washington. And yet, the system keeps moving forward. Markets adapt, investors adjust, governments refinance debt. In many ways, the global financial system has grown used to America's borrowing. But history shows something important. Financial crises rarely arrive suddenly. They build slowly, quietly, until one unexpected event triggers a chain reaction. That's why economists watch the debt trend so closely. Not because collapse is guaranteed, but because understanding the risks early allows countries to adjust before problems spiral out of control. The truth is, America's debt story isn't just about numbers. It's about the long-term choices that shape the economy. Decisions about spending, growth, taxes, and investment. The path forward will likely define the financial future of the next generation. So the real question isn't whether the United States has debt. Almost every nation does. The real question is how that debt is managed over time, and whether the world's largest economy can keep balancing growth, stability, and trust. Because in the end, the strength of a financial system depends on confidence. And if you enjoy understanding the hidden forces shaping our world, you're in the right place.